And this is the important thing that people should understand. If anyone who disagrees with me and my views are still listening to this conversation at this point, which is unlikely, but if they are, this is the point that I think people need to understand. There's nothing liberal about this ideology whatsoever. There's nothing liberal or progressive about an ideology that says people should be treated differently because of the color of their skin, or that says that some people should be discriminated against because they happen to have been born in a male body, and other people should be discriminated in favor of because they've been born in a female body. There's nothing progressive or liberal about this. This is an authoritarian ideology that wants to reshape society by punishing people because people who looked like them in the past did things that people don't agree with anymore. That's it. It's an authoritarian ideology. There's nothing to do with liberalism. And the reason that it's happening all around us is that they've infiltrated all these institutions and organizations.
The bliss of the abyss, it's here now.
Welcome back to the Bliss of the Abyss. Right, straight to it. This week, our guest is Konstantin Kisin. You probably know him as the co-host of the very popular YouTube series Triggernometry, where they have people from all across the political spectrum and discuss the difficult questions. I know him as a friend and an actor. He was in my short movie Hats. I'll drop the link in the show notes. Or perhaps you know him from his recent appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. That's right, the first ever guest in the history of the Bliss of the Abyss to also be on Rogan. Onwards and upwards we go. So this is a really great conversation. We get into all kinds of things, from Konstantin's moving to the UK and being completely broke to building up to where he is today, getting on Rogan. We talk about the comedy industry, quitting stand-up, being called right-wing, hyperbole in arguments, things like gender, political correctness, social media, everything. This is a really wide-ranging and interesting conversation, and I encourage everybody who likes it to like and subscribe to the podcast, join the Patreon. Thanks again for listening. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome again. I'll see you next time. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen and all kinds of folks, welcome Konstantin Kisin.
Are you drinking milk?
No, it's a coffee with a lot of milk in it.
Okay, right. It looks suspiciously milky. I've gone the complete opposite. Mine is totally jet black. I don't know if you can see.
Right.
It's
You're a real man.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
well
all
said.
the testosterone flow through my body. Anyway, Konstantin Kisin, long time coming. Welcome to the Bliss of the Abyss. How are you doing, mate?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me, mate.
Yeah, of course. Now, of course, since I last saw you, you've gone from strength to strength. But I like to think that I am responsible for your big break. After all,
Absolutely.
I did cast you in the significant Hollywood blockbuster Hats.
Yes.
Movie.
What were the sales on that? How's that done?
We're still waiting because, it's doing international box office right now. So we're still waiting for the full figures on that. But yeah, you'll be getting your returns pretty soon. Don't worry.
Look forward to it.
It's all in the post. But Jesus, since then, mate, I mean, you've launched Triggernometry, which has become this incredible international success. You've written a book, An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, which I really enjoyed reading. It's a great book, man. Really funny, really thought-provoking, and we can talk about all of that. And then I see you on Rogan, like the biggest show in the world, and then you're having a puff with him. I mean, how crazy has this trajectory been? Like, do you, obviously I'm joking, it's not because of me, but do you credit it to that like initial news story? The one.
Well, yeah, I do. First of all, I'm not sure that we launched Triggernometry after you and I were doing Hats. So when would we
Hats?
Yeah.
I think it was 2018, so maybe Triggernometry precedes it a little bit.
So Triggernometry started in April 2018.
Right.
So I definitely think the news story, which is me turning down the safe space contract, that definitely did not hurt the process. But having started Triggernometry already, I think we were already on our way. And it's weird. I said this to Rogan, actually. I have done many things in my life, and very frequently it's not been the case that I've gone, oh, I'm going to do this and I am convinced this is going to be a success. Quite often I've done something and I've gone, well, I'll try this and I'm going to work hard at it and see what happens.
Right.
But I think what is fair to say that when we started Triggernometry, I knew it would be a success before we had like a single person who was listening or watching it.
Really?
Yeah, I just had this deep sense of knowing that it was the right thing at the right time, and we were the right people to do it.
How have you had that feeling about anything before?
Yes, my wife, we met when we
Right.
were 18, we were married by 20, we've been together ever since.
So like these super rare events in life where it's like a gut feeling of
Yeah.
like, oh, this is the right thing.
Yeah, it just you know that click you get when everything just like goes and everything is in place. That's how I felt, and that's how I felt about trigonometry, which is why I spent the first couple of years of doing it actually being very frustrated with it, because I remember the conversation we would often have at the beginning. It was like, this is objectively great content. Why is no one watching it? And I think a lot of people doing, podcasts and YouTube shows and all sorts of things like that will feel that. And so maybe it was just the natural thing that you feel. But I always felt that, I was very frustrated, not only with the fact that we weren't going as quickly as I wanted, but also, we didn't have the look and sound of the show that I wanted it to be from the beginning. If people go back and watch the first episodes, it looks like a seance where, like, in this black room, there's no light on anyone except the guest. We are to the side. It just looks really weird. And I was always saying to Francis, we need to get, like, this needs to look different. We need lapel microphones. And that was a thing that we were talking about at the time, but obviously, particularly back then, we were funding it ourselves. It was just our cash. We weren't making any money. We didn't make any money. So what, let me put it like this. We did not generate any money for like a year plus of doing it, maybe a year and a half, 2 years even. And then we didn't take any money, as in we didn't pay ourselves even like 500 quid a month salary until the pandemic.
Wow.
Really. So we did it off our own backs with as a passion project for like for two plus years. And it only became, it's like that Yogi Berra quote, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success. It's like you build, and then there's a bit of a breakthrough, and then you build more, and there's another one. And there's been a lot of really cool moments along the way. The time we made it full time, that was huge. And actually, it was a result of having to leave the place that we were using as a studio, and we were like, well, why don't we just double down? Why, it's the pandemic, why don't we just take it full time, and instead of putting out one interview a week, why don't we do 2? Why don't we do the live streams that we've now added, which we call the raw shows? The first time we interviewed some of the people that we both really look up to, the first time we interviewed Douglas Murray, the first time we interviewed Jordan Peterson, those were like the early days, and behind each one of those there's like a long story of like how it happened. And it wasn't just like, hey, Jordan, would you like to come on the show? Yes, please. It all took months of work and back and forth, and the yes, it's happening, oh no, it's not anymore, and yes, and stuff like that. And so at every step of the way there's been these incredible ups and downs. And of course, the latest things, going to the US, interviewing Bill Burr,
Rogan,
Sam Harris, being on Rogan, like all of that. It's been really fun. And for me, I suppose the most important thing is I never really felt at home in anything that I did, really. Like, before I became a comedian, I had my own freelance translation business. And look, objectively, it was successful. I was making decent money. I was one of the best people in my field, in my language pair. So if you needed somebody to translate something quite complicated from Russian into English, I'd usually be one of the top 3 names in the world that you might look to do that in those particular areas. So it's not like I was struggling,
but it wasn't filling you with passion.
No, I wasn't happy doing it at all. It was a great way out for me, because what happened with my family, I've talked about this a lot, obviously, is my parents were very wealthy for a very short period of time. And so they sent me to boarding school, and that was the time that they had money. And by the time I got to university, they no longer did. And I never finished my degree, and I needed to survive. Basically, I needed something that would allow me to provide for me and my wife, and and that's how I fell into translation. And after about 10 years of that, I was like, okay, I can do this. I've ticked all the boxes. I've reached all the levels. I think I spent too much time as a kid playing computer games, because I sort of think of life as a bit of a computer game. So like I'd got through all the
final
levels.
boss.
Yeah, I'd killed the final boss. And I was just like, this is over. I need a new game. And that's partly why I started doing comedy, and I enjoyed that a lot. I enjoyed most of that a lot. What I didn't enjoy was the travel. Which by the time the pandemic hit, I realized it was absolutely killing me, and it was hurting my relationship with my wife, which is, to me, is by far the most precious thing that I have. And the other thing I really didn't enjoy is other comedians, because I never really felt at home with other comedians. I didn't think they were interesting people by and large.
They're the best and the worst of people often, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, but disproportionately to one side, in my opinion. So I made some really great friends in the comedy world that I keep in touch with to this day and really respect. And the fact that, for example, for me, the fact that I'm really good friends with Simon Evans, to me, that's like something I really cherish, because Simon is, I just respect the hell out of his comedy. I respect the hell out of his, commentary. He's not just a comedian. He's someone who's got really, really nuanced opinions about things. It's someone I massively look up to. So like people like that I met through comedy, Andrew Doyle, who I'm like just in awe of often. The friendship that I have with Francis as a result of doing Triggernometry, Nico Yearwood, who's there's a bunch of people I could go on. I don't want to, offend anyone by doing a really long
the
list.
Oscars list, and if you didn't mention someone, then
there's a load of people, but they are a small minority of the industry, and there are a lot of people who are very close-minded, and very superficial as well. So that was something I really didn't enjoy as much. I never hung around at comedy shows after I was done, other than to do a bit of networking, which is a really sad thing to have to do, basically.
Yeah, it's the vagaries of every business, though, isn't it? I mean, it's the same in translation, I'm sure. Like you said, the top three. Well, then you probably know the top three, and you're probably in conversation with them about the jobs that are coming up and stuff like that. It's the nature of it. But
what I mean is, I wasn't excited. I was not excited to be in that space. I'm excited to be in the space I'm now. And look, I'm not having a go at anyone. People are the way that they are, and they are the way that they are because of their life experiences, because of their genetics, and because of what they went through, and the industry that they're in, and blah 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 blah. So I'm not saying they're all bad people. It just wasn't my group of people that I wanted to hang around with.
It wasn't your tribe.
So to me, doing Triggernometry most of all is just such a relief, because I'm now surrounded by people that I love being in conversation with, and
it's such a broad range of people that you have on, because you still have comedians on as well, and those are really fun chats, because you can be silly with them, but you also have some very, very serious people on. Like the Italian restaurant episode was like really kind of shocking to me, actually, and then you have sort of like the Sean Walsh episode, where you're just laughing, even though he's got a tragic story to say. He's just very funny, naturally off the cuff, and it just rolls and rolls and rolls. And I think having both those skill sets is really interesting. And I said like tribe earlier, but it's such a weird one, because you have such a broad church on there. It's from all sides of the spectrum. But I do see a lot of people call you guys right wing. It must be tiring to have to hear that and defend that shit, because it's so obviously the least charitable and nuanced analysis of what you guys do. Does it piss you off, or
no? It used to, because what happens is, the thing is, I suspect that this is probably less true if you are not asking difficult questions and if you're not raising difficult subjects.
Mm.
But I also think that, we have 350 something thousand subscribers now on YouTube, and probably a similar number on the podcast. So that's, an audience of, at least 500,000 people, if not more than that, right? Probably more. Once you get to that level, you're no longer you're no longer in charge of how other people perceive or represent you to the world. And I found this because I often find that when people write articles about us or talk about us, even people who like us and who think that we're on their side, or they don't accurately represent who we are, what we stand for. So I think there are a few people who are definitely deliberately trying to misrepresent us, so in order to attack us or to discredit what we do or whatever. But I think the majority of people, they're not able, for obvious reasons. They don't know us, they've never met us in the way that you've met me, for example. You don't know what kind of person I am. And also people get in their head about stuff. I remember having a conversation with somebody about they basically suggested, so as we talked about on Rogan, there were a couple of times where we were forced to leave our studio because the people who owned that studio would disagree with what we were doing or whatever. And the other day, one of the people who was involved in us leaving their studio,
so had formally kicked you out of a studio.
He himself wasn't the one that did it, but he was part of a group of people who were involved in it.
Sure.
He said, sometimes I think you're just doing this for publicity. And I was going, wait, you made us leave. How are we doing this for publicity? But I found this when I turned down that contract, when I was a complete unknown comedian. I turned down this contract. It goes super viral in the media, and people were saying to me, "Oh, you've got like a great PR team." And I was like,
that PR team is one man,
and that PR team is me and my agent, who was really not that involved in much of it. She did a great job managing the publicity, but she didn't create any of it. But once you become a public person in any way, your reputation and how people perceive you is not really within your control. So initially it really pisses you off, because you're like, wait, that's not me. No, I'm not this. And by the way, I felt that way about people who were like on my team too. They would misrepresent what I'd said, or position me in a way that I wasn't comfortable with. But then I just realized, once you are in the public eye in any way, people they're gonna think what they think, and all you can do is just be who you are and try to stick with your principles. So eventually it's a difficult process, but it takes a little bit of maturing where you kind of get past that. And look, every now and again, I'm tempted to get annoyed about it, and then you just go, it's just that thing.
It's that thing again, right?
It's just that thing.
It's the developing of a thicker skin that sort of builds up over time. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because sort of back to what you're saying about comedy, is you'd think a lot of comedians would have a thicker skin, but it turns out that so many of them have the thinnest of thin skins, right? And in your book, that you mentioned the stuff about Sophie Hagen, ironically saying that her fans are on the right side of history, and having like snowflake proof material, and a lot of that stuff to me is just patently ridiculous and ripe for poking fun at. But I do wonder what your take is on this, because as you mentioned, Andrew Doyle, he's also in the book, he has this long good quote, but then at the end it always comes to this conclusion that I'm always wondering about, which is, he says, eventually they'll destroy it completely, right? And it's always this sort of like hyperbolic thing of it will be ripped apart and never survive, and I just can't see that happen. What do you think?
It's a good point, and I think people often confuse what Andrew and I say about that with the idea that this is the inevitable outcome of woke progressivism, or whatever you want to call it, right? I try not to use the word woke. Let's call it progressivism, right? I am quite positive that is not going to happen, But what Andrew and I are saying is, if this is allowed to continue unchallenged, that is what would happen, which is why we are challenging it. This is kind of like people go, well, the pendulum will swing back. Yeah, if we say something, it will. Right. If we do something, like Andrew's created Comedy Unleashed, which is actually formulating a counter position when it comes to comedy. It's offering people an opportunity to do any comedy that they want, and to show that just because somebody wants to challenge the prevalent narrative in the comedy industry doesn't mean that they're evil and a bigot and whatever.
Okay, so it's sort of like that Pastor Niemöller quote, like, first they came for the Christians, I did not speak up because I was not a Christian, kind of. Well,
let's not compare this to standing up to the Nazis, because people will misinterpret that. But
I tried.
you did your best, but it's more like, if this is allowed to go on in this way, then we're going to have a serious problem, which is why it's important for people to speak up and to go, no, we don't have to do everything like this. I find it funny when comedians, do the things that Sophie does and whatever, but I'm not suggesting that she should be prevented from doing it. I think in many ways, the current dogma of the comedy industry, which is rapidly destroying both the TV comedy that we all used to like and watch, and rapidly destroying the Edinburgh Festival. I know, for example, we just interviewed Tom Stade, the brilliant Canadian comic who's operating in the UK, and he's just come back from the Edinburgh Festival, and he was saying basically the cancellation of Jerry Sadowitz's show, essentially, there are a lot of people saying it killed the festival permanently, because it's basically overt censorship of comedians' material. How a festival called The Fringe is going to maintain that narrative once it's doing that is difficult to see. So I think that's happening. Do I think that's a good or bad thing? Well, at this point, I'm kind of tempted to say it's actually quite a good thing, because the industry was becoming very stale. And it's forced people like me, it's forced people like Francis, it's forced people like Leo Kurz and Nico Yearwood and Darius and the guys who do GB News now. It forced them to look elsewhere and not to operate within the confines of that industry, and create stuff that, as you can see, people actually want to watch, right? Triggernometry has a huge audience. It has, we had a comedian on called Freddie Quinn, who most people wouldn't know, but I don't think he agrees with us on a lot of things, but he did say, I would much rather have 40,000 YouTube subscribers than do Live at the Apollo. And if you remember, within my lifetime, one appearance on Live at the Apollo,
and then you're grandfathered into the system forever.
You would make a career of that. It's probably Mock the Week's been cancelled. The Mash Report, which I used to write for, by the way, has been cancelled. Well, not renewed, rather, both of those. And I'm pretty sure that's going to happen with Live at the Apollo as well. So they are destroying the industry from the inside. And I was trying to warn people that this was happening. They thought that the reason I wanted to warn them about this is I'm evil and right-wing and whatever. Well, fine. Now they're the ones that are going to have to lie in the bed that they made, while I am enjoying my life on the internet.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You said a couple of things that really interested me, because one thing, reading your book and Immigrants Love Letter to the West, available now, is your past as a translator comes up about like words, and you just said there about the word woke and the idea of the fringe, and I just wanted to challenge you on something, because you're a linguist, and I'm fascinated by words and etymology and all that kind of stuff. And you say, once upon a time when things were saying gender was simply a synonym for sex, and that's not really true, is it? Like, if you look into the origin of that word, it comes from the same root as genre, right? And it came from like genus. And like, you make a point of like words, they're trying to, activists are trying to change the meaning of our words. And I agree with you. Yes, they are. But I don't think there's anything new about that. So, for example, the word whore or gay or bully, these are all examples of words that are called sweetheart words. I'm telling you, the audience, you will know this stuff, obviously. They started out with a positive meaning. Bully comes from the Dutch for brother. And over time, these words adopt a pejorative term such that today sometimes the original meaning is completely gone. Isn't that just what's happening when people are using some of these words like fascist or liberal? Yeah, it's losing its power because people are changing it from its original meaning, but that's just what happens with words.
I think it really depends on the kind of words that you're talking about. So, for example, gender, I don't think, which is where you started this conversation.
Yeah.
I don't think that's an example of that. Gender is a word that was used exclusively to describe language, linguistic constructions, right? The gender, like female, feminine, and masculine in language. And then it was actually, I mean, this is a long and boring conversation.
Not boring to me. This is what we're doing. 15th century. Get in there, mate.
Well, it was actually a section of feminism that invented the concept of gender. And this was a way of protecting, in their eyes, protecting women from the impositions of the idea that biological sex means that it comes with certain behaviors. In other words, you and I as men have to behave in masculine ways, and therefore women have to be meek and be in the kitchen and whatever.
Yeah, like roles. But it actually, it dates back to way before that, because sex became, you know, not only biological, it also became like sexy. It acquires that kind of form, and then gender is able to isolate from that and just be like, well, it's not to do with sex, it's just to do with, you know, anatomy almost, in a way. And then it changes over time and becomes those roles. I agree with you. Yeah, it does. Yeah. And then it's a performative function in society.
So that's the distinction that I'm talking about. The invention of the idea of gender identity. That's what I'm talking about, right?
Okay.
The idea that we need a separate set of categorizations to describe essentially how people behave.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas I don't think gender identity is a real thing. I don't think it exists. It can exist, and there are many. This is the problem with language. Language is a trick that we use to create ideas in our heads that don't map onto reality. You can create any sort of theory or concept with language without it having to be connected to reality in any way. And so, yeah, no. So I'm talking about that. Of course, language evolves over time, but this is a deliberate separation. This was deliberate. The idea was that the separation of the idea of sex and biology from gender identity would protect women from being imposed upon by the evil patriarchy, right? That was the point. And the problem for us feminists are very rapidly starting to realize is once you invent the concept of gender identity, like many new inventions, it comes with all sorts of unintended consequences that will potentially then end up being used against you.
But the idea that drove it initially from those early feminists, does that not have value to it? There was a reason that these ideas have come to the fore, and wasn't it largely just because women were societally more oppressed and expected to fulfill certain things that we can call gender roles? We can call it something else as well, like you say, language is a trick, but it references something that did exist and was less favorable for women, surely, and yes, improved since.
Yes, it was just the wrong solution to the right problem.
Okay, so what's the right solution? Or do you know?
I'm not saying I necessarily have the right solution at all. I'm just saying that this particular solution not only did not solve the problem, it in many ways created a new problem, which feminists are now dealing with, which is people going, oh, gender identity. That means I'm not connected to my biological sex. Right. Therefore, I can identify as whichever way I want. And as it happens, it turns out there are quite a lot of people who are male biologically who wouldn't mind identifying as female.
Yeah. What's this quote you have in your book that just blew my mind? It's like men who have periods and give birth are men. And so, yeah.
And this is the LCLU saying this, the American Civil Liberties Union.
It's I mean, how do you wrap your head? You talk about trick. They're tricking themselves with that.
Well, this is what happens when you invent the concept of gender identity. This is my point, right? which doesn't exist, in my opinion. There are people who want to dress as the opposite sex. There are people who wish to present as the opposite sex. That's fine. That does not mean that they are that opposite sex. And there is no such thing as gender identity for them to identify into.
Okay.
They're not male, and they're not female. If they are they are the sex that they were born, and they choose to behave in a different way, right? That's perfectly normal. It's existed for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Those people shouldn't be discriminated against or mistreated or treated badly in any way, unless they are in a position where they're infringing upon the rights of other people.
Right.
For example, someone with a penis in a female prison, whatever their gender identity is, does not belong there, right? So that's kind of what I was getting at by talking about the separation and the divorce of those two concepts.
Yeah, and I think that's probably fair, and like it's sort of, I guess, related to that, the Carlin bit about words, shell shock, PTSD, that whole thing, the sanitizing language. I know you say he's like your favorite comedian, which great, amazing, right? I feel like what other choice do people have? Do you know what I mean? Like I like you say, I think they're probably acting mostly, well, maybe this is one for debate. Mostly, I think people are probably acting in good faith and trying to make the world a better place. And
those are the worst people.
Do you not think you're one of those?
Of course I am. Of course I am.
You're one of the worst.
Yeah, of course. Those are the worst people. The worst people are, the most dangerous people are the people who think they are going to improve the world and who don't recognize their own limitations.
Right.
And they believe that their good intentions entitle them to tell other people how to behave or to punish people for not behaving the way that they think. That's the difference between me and those. I am unquestionably one of the people who's what in Russian we call pasionari, so someone who's passionately concerned with the fate of the society in which they live, right?
Yeah.
The difference between me and these people is I have a check on myself in that I don't ever believe in punishing or restricting other people. I believe in upholding the laws that we have and ensuring that they are fair and balanced to everybody.
Right. And
I don't want to destroy my political opponents. I don't want to cancel them. I don't want to stomp them into the ground. I want us to have a free society in which we both present our arguments, and the arguments that are better win. And they are the people that are elected, and those policies are implemented. Right. Now, we're obviously not there.
Yes.
But my point is, I don't want Sophie Hagen not to be able to perform on the comedy circuit, but almost the entire comedy industry would like me not to be able to perform on the comedy circuit, which is no big loss for me at this point, but at one point it would have been, right? So it's the desire to punish people into compliance that's my problem. I have no problem with people holding any sort of view that they like, as long as they're not forcibly implementing it on other people, and as long as they're not breaking the law and they're not infringing on the rights of others.
Right. And this kind of comes from one of the really interesting things I learned from your book, is the origin of the term political correctness. This sounds like it's in the same kind of territory, right? Which was invented in Soviet Russia to describe the opinion that you are meant to have, and it will be enforced upon you if you don't have it, and the punishments will be great.
Yeah, and that's one facet of it. But I guess the example, what I'm really talking about is there's one of my favorite Russian sci-fi writers were these two brothers called the Strugatsky brothers. They are the people who wrote one of the short stories they wrote was Picnic by the Roadside. And if you're a gamer, the Stalker series of games is based on their writings on that very one, Picnic by the Roadside. And the concept of that short story is basically some aliens land in a small patch of land somewhere, and they leave behind all sorts of weird anomalies and shape-shifting items and things like that. And there's these people called stalkers who go into this zone, the exclusion zone, and get these artifacts out of there. And some of these artifacts have, hugely powerful elements to them, but they're also very dangerous. And anyway, there's a scene in this short story where these two people say, well, what if these aliens, they're here to help us? What if they're why would you fight people who are here to do good? and the other guy says, I would fight them because they want to do good as they understand it. Right. I am against people imposing on others their values by force. And I try not to be one of those people. Now, I have values that I think are very important. Freedom of expression, freedom to protest, freedom to discuss ideas, the constant questioning of dogma. I think these are things actually many of the comedians of the 80s and 90s would have been behind, and actually many comedians today, particularly the more successful ones, would agree with. But there's a new dogma in the comedy world that says, no, these are bad values: freedom of expression, freedom of debate, freedom of different people to have different ideas, a perpetual curiosity about politics, about life, about these things, a genuine openness of discussion. These are bad things. This is what fascists do, right? This is the new dogma. I am opposed to that, but I would never want to put those people in a camp or damage their career, right? That's not what I'm about. So people can be passionate about improving the world, and I am definitely one of those people. But the check I try to have on myself is I try to play by my own rules, and I try to treat other people the way I'd want to be treated.
So that's quite idealistic, utopian.
I am an idealist.
Yeah. Because these things that you're talking about, like, barely ever exist throughout human history. Do you know what I mean?
No.
There's pockets of them where they come up, and then repression is the order of the day.
Yes.
I think you mentioned at one point sort of media should be this sort of free, open thing to challenge the powerful, and it's like, well, yeah, but has that ever existed for longer than 5 minutes before?
To some extent, it has. To some extent, it has.
Sure, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but it's very rare, and it's the exception rather than the rule.
Which is why it's so worth fighting for.
Which is why it's so worth fighting for. But that,
right.
I guess what I'm getting to is one of the things you said. One of my favorite quotes from your book is radical socialism and communism are two cheeks of the same arse, right? Which is just a beautiful bit of phrasing. But I actually find, reading between the lines of some of what you say, I think, because you're a utopian, I think some of the ideals...
I'm not utopian. I'm idealist.
Sorry, idealist, fine.
Yeah, I'm not utopian.
That word instead. I don't mean to misquote you. I find some of the ideals enshrined in those ideas are also some of the things that you're saying. Now, you also say that the excesses of socialism are only matched by the grotesqueness of capitalism, right? So I guess I'm asking is, like, how close to this kind of idealist society can we get, given that you obviously we've tried running the socialism experiment, it degrades into dictatorship almost immediately. And capitalism degrades into cronyism, shall we say, a lot of the time. How close to that ideal one that you're talking about with the free media, freedom to express your opinions and not be cancelled or destroyed or pilloried, how close is that to happening ever? How likely is it?
I don't think you're ever going to get to the ideals, which is why I'm not a utopian. A utopian is someone who believes that the ideal society is possible. I don't believe it's possible. One of my favorite people to read is Thomas Sowell, who talks a lot about, the problems that happen when we fail to recognize human nature, and human nature is that we are imperfect. So I don't believe that we are ever going to get to that ideal society, and I'm therefore not willing to throw out the baby with the bathwater in order to get there. What I am saying, though, is we have some very good ideas for how to be as close to a good society as we possibly can be. And we're currently, in some areas, moving away from that. We are moving away from the idea that the best society is a free society. No, now we are concerned with safety. And we've redefined that word to mean something it never used to mean, of course. Safety used to mean the absence of physical violence. Now it means that no one challenges your opinion.
Right.
I don't think that's good. I don't think that's a good direction of travel. I don't think the restricting what comedians can and can't joke about is a move in the right direction. I don't think narrowing the what people call the Overton window, the range of ideas that can be discussed in public without you being punished, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea to call people who vote a different way to you in a referendum fascists and Nazis, because those words have an actual meaning.
Yeah.
And if you erode the nature of those words, then what happens is people who are actual fascists and actual Nazis now have a defense, and they go, well, look at those guys. Those centrist guys at Triggernometry are getting called right-wing and Nazis and evil. So we are not Nazis either. And we've had a situation, there was a period about a year and a half ago when we were being trolled by actual Nazis who were very upset that a Jewish guy from Russia and what they call Francis the Fat Jew, even though he's not Jewish,
Yes.
these two Jews in inverted commas were
Right.
doing this show that we're exploring some of these more difficult conversations, but not doing it from the way they would have wanted, right? So we were having the conversation about should the country have open borders, or do we need, for example, to have immigration controls? We were interviewing people who were pro-Brexit, but we were doing it from our position as two people in the center. These Nazis hated us, but when we said these guys are Nazis, ignore them, there were a lot of people go, well, everyone gets called a Nazi now.
Right.
And that's because you've eroded the meaning of the words. So all of these trends are not moving us in a better direction. So I am not suggesting that we should pursue a utopia, and I'm certainly not suggesting that we pursue it by any means. All I'm saying is, you know, the culture can move in this direction or in that direction. I don't think we're currently moving in the right direction, and I think we need to reorientate ourselves back to remember what are actually the values that made the West what it is now, which is the most powerful, the most prosperous, the most successful societies in the history of the world.
Right. I guess what interests me about this is something that I see people say quite a lot about, like, and you mentioned in your book as well, sort of like the idea of the West or of Europe or something like this. That's a bit of a language trick, though, isn't it? Like, what even using the term West doesn't make sense, because we're
it's the best criticism of the book. I've said this in many interviews. It's the best criticism of the book is the title. Calling it an immigrant's love letter to the West is a bit of a marketing trick, because what it really should be called is an immigrant's love letter to the Anglosphere, which is what I'm actually talking about.
So the ideals of classical liberalism, basically.
To some extent. I don't know that classical liberalism alone is the answer. I mean, as you can probably see in the book, I talk a lot about had the housing crisis, and the problem of inequality. I am, you know, I'm not one of these people who thinks that because I lived through communism and radical socialism, no form of social intervention in the market is valid or valuable. I do think we've got to look after people who can't look after themselves. And we've got to make sure that the crony capitalism that you mentioned earlier is not allowed to overwhelm the system to the point where we have a situation now where young people, you know, I talk to conservative people about this all the time. They're like, oh yeah, young people got to start having kids. Well, if they can't, if they can't buy a house or a flat to live in, how are you expecting these people to be conservative? I've just my wife and I had a baby 4 months ago.
Oh yeah, congratulations.
Thank you so much. And it's one of the things that unquestionably grounds you a lot more in reality, because whatever theories you had about how you were going to do things or how things were going to work out or whatever, when they clash with the reality of there's a baby and it's screaming, and whatever thoughts you had about the way you're supposed to do this, actually you got to find what works. So having children grounds you. It means that you have to provide a stable income. So again, you can't be away with the fairies in your head. You've got to go out there and do a job and bring in the money to make it possible, right? So a lot of the answer to a lot of the social craziness is to deal with the problems that to some extent are causing it. So there's those real things on the one hand. On the other hand, there's also social media too. And social media amplifies a lot of this craziness and stupidity. In a world where fewer and fewer people have the experience of being around kids, for example, that's where it's a lot easier to go on social media and to go, oh, there's no difference between men and women. Well, not unless you have seen them. You know what I mean?
If you've stepped out of your door and met one.
Yeah.
I know. And you've got some good quotes in there from some pretty wild people, like, you know, trees are racist, or there's one I'm very angry at you. You made me read this book that I'll never unread now. Thank you very much. Why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. It's the most ridiculous waste of my time that I was hate reading the whole time. And obviously these figures, it's great to poke fun of them. I don't know, have you ever heard the story of Mina's coffee shop?
No.
Oh my God. We don't have much time, so I won't tell you the whole story. I'll send you a link. It is the most fascinating example of a left-wing ideologue collective being all like pro this, pro that, and just eating itself entirely. And obviously these are the most entertaining examples, and the most ripe for ridicule. But do you really think that's the general movement of the whole society, or is it just these amplified noises online that actually in real life, like you say, you walk out the door, you meet people in real life? I was at a Ricky Gervais gig the other day. You talk to people, everyone's laughing about crazy shit and just being normal most of the time, aren't they?
At a Ricky Gervais gig, they are. Yeah, I think you've pre-selected your audience there a little bit.
Well, funny
it's a nice try slipping that one past me. No, but obviously this insanity is crazier among people who, as we just alluded to, don't leave their house and they sit on Twitter all day. Undoubtedly the case. However, and this is a point that Andrew Doyle made on our recent interview, which I thought was actually spectacularly accurate. Look at some of the legislation that this conservative government has brought in. It brought in legislation to stop people from protesting, and then they did what they did even worse is they brought in the online, or they're trying to, I think, I can't remember if, I think it has gone through, the online safety bill. The conservative government of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland is bringing in a bill which is called the Online Harms Bill or the Online Safety Bill. In other words, they're quoting directly from the critical theory playbook. They're quoting directly from the progressive activists, and it is now a criminal offense in this country to be grossly offensive. People in this country are being arrested for memes. People in this country, like Joe Lycett, are comedians being investigated for jokes, right? So we can talk about all of this being like a symbol of online stupidity, which of course it is. But unfortunately, some of the people who are stupid online are also stupid in real life, and they take their stupidity from their university campuses into the real world, where eventually they become responsible for writing our laws and enforcing them. They go into the Houses of Parliament. I was at the House of Lords on the day the Queen passed away, and the person who invited us there was explaining to us basically that the reason that all of these social changes are happening at a legislative level is that all these old people, the MPs and the Lords, they've got their grandkids going, but look, we've got to be this and we've got to be that. And they're like, okay, let's do something. You know, this is a white patriarchal institution. Absolutely it is. You walk around the House of Lords, you can tell that straight away, right?
Yeah.
That we've got to do something. So what do? Let's get one of these extremists in to explain to us why we're all racist. Let's get one of these extremists in to explain why we're all sexist. Instead of going, okay, look, what we've done over centuries is excluded certain types of people. Let's remove the barriers. Remove the barriers. Not blame ourselves for centuries of oppression. Just remove the barriers and let people compete on a level footing. And if you do that, you're not going to have a problem getting women. This is one of the reasons I'm not a fan of the Conservative Party, particularly in its current incarnation. But this is one of the reasons the Conservatives actually are able to get a lot of quote unquote diversity, because they just remove the barriers of people's way, and they go, we don't care what your skin color is or your sex is, as long as you do the job, right? You don't need these diversity initiatives in anything like the way that the other side of the political spectrum thinks you do.
But Konstantin, two things, right? It's like, one, all of this legislation is being passed by quote unquote right wingers, right? And but you're saying it comes from a radical progressive left mindset.
It does.
So what is going on there, I suppose? And then part two is like, sometimes don't we have to be ahead of the like, if you think about civil rights, right? So giving people the right to vote who didn't have it before, or Jewish issues, like me and you are both Jews, right? It's like certain professions that they weren't allowed to be in, and then, you know, over time someone changes things. Don't you sometimes have to be ahead of things in order for these things to happen? And
was there pro-Jewish discrimination?
Anti-Jewish discrimination?
No, was there pro-Jewish discrimination? That's what I'm asking you. Did we say Gentiles must be excluded in order that more Jews are included in these professions? Did we say we've got to have a minimum of 10% Jews or 3% Jews or 1% Jews or 0.0001% Jews, which is about what we are of the total global population, right, in the world? We didn't say any of that. No. We said, stop killing us, stop discriminating against us, stop treating us as second-class citizens. That's all. That's what the Civil Rights Act in America and the Civil Rights Movement was about. It was saying, let me be treated on the content of my character. In other words, let me be treated like everybody else. Is that what's happening? Is that your experience of how comedy lineups are booked at the moment?
No.
Is that how they're booked, on the basis of if you're good enough, you're going to be in this? No, they're booked on the basis
of legislation is either. It's deeply authoritarian.
Well, exactly.
But how's it coming from the progressive left? That's what confuses me.
It's coming from the progressive left because they're the people that are clamoring for it, and then the people in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords listen to their 18-year-old granddaughter who's banging on about it and go, "Oh, it's true. We have been very white and we have been exclusively male for centuries. We've got to do something." Well, as we listen to these progressives, this is what they're suggesting. Well, I don't know. Maybe we are all racist or whatever. Maybe we do need to bring in someone who's paid $2,000 an hour to tell us how Britain is the center of the global patriarchy or whatever.
Right. Or the white fragile. Have you read it? I haven't read it, but those people who pay thousands of pounds to sit down and have dinner and be told how horribly racist they are.
Right.
Yeah. There's a weird self-flagellation streak that's kind of in a lot of people, certainly always been there, though.
And this is the important thing that people should understand. If anyone who disagrees with me and my views are still listening to this conversation at this point, which is unlikely, but if they are, this is the point that I think people need to understand. There's nothing liberal about this ideology whatsoever. There's nothing liberal or progressive about an ideology that says people should be treated differently because of the color of their skin, or that says that some people should be discriminated against because they happen to have been born in a male body, and other people should be discriminated in favor of because they've been born in a female body. There's nothing progressive or liberal about this. This is an authoritarian ideology that wants to reshape society by punishing people because people who looked like them in the past did things that people don't agree with anymore. That's it. It's an authoritarian ideology. There's nothing to do with liberalism. And the reason that it's happening all around us is that they've infiltrated all these institutions and organizations. The police, for example, are now completely and squarely dictated to by the College of Policing, which is where a lot of these ideologies have been embedded through Stonewall. The reason that the police now arrest people for memes is that Stonewall was taken on board as one of the advisors to the police authorities in how to police conversations about the trans issue, right? So it's not that we have ordinary police officers who are members of our audience, who pay us money, who watch the show, that we talk to regularly. The ordinary Bobby on the beat is not interested in going around arresting people for posting something on Facebook. They're not, but that is what they're being told because their organization was advised by Stonewall, which is now rapidly becoming one of the most discredited activist organizations in this country. So it was coming from the radical left, but it's been embedded in a lot of our public institutions. The media is overrun with it. Comedy is overrun with it. And that's why these ideas are being enforced.
So I guess that all kind of comes round to the freedom of speech issue, which is, I suppose, at the heart of all of this. And like, there was one thing in your book, who was it? Brendan
O'Neill?
Yes, who said, "Oh yeah, I'm a complete free speech absolutist." And then almost 2 sentences later is saying, obviously, incitement to hatred is a different issue. It's like
incitement to violence.
Yeah, incitement to violence, right? So it's like, so we shouldn't have hate speech laws, but also you can't incite to violence. I feel like sometimes the people who trumpet loudly the free speech absolutist thing are using two definitions here in side by side, because obviously if you're saying freedom absolute of speech, then that doesn't include any caveats, right? That's the whole point of the word absolute.
Yeah, that's why I don't agree with Brendan on many of the things that he says about free speech, even though I agree with a lot and I really like Brendan.
Right.
And I would never call myself a free speech absolutist because, for example, Brendan thinks there should be no libel laws, no defamation laws, etc. And he's got his own arguments for that. I don't agree with that. I do think we need libel laws. I don't think you should be able to shout fire in a crowded theatre, which I don't think you would agree with either, to be honest. And I don't think, I don't understand why we restrict speech that is an incitement to violence only. I think speech that incites people to any criminal activity actually should be illegal.
Yeah,
it's not if you it's not necessarily about violence. Like, it should be illegal to incite people to, not pay their taxes or whatever it is, in public.
Right.
If you go on Question Time and you say the government should not, not the government, people should not pay their taxes anymore, I mean, that is illegal to me as well, because you're inciting people to commit a crime. So yeah, I don't agree with free speech absolutism, and I never ever call myself a free speech absolutist.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is that the people who are pushing these bills, like this one that's making it illegal to post something online, they're probably thinking about it in a similar way that you just articulated, that they don't want people to incite people to do things that are illegal. Well, now these things are illegal, so
it's not illegal to post an offensive meme.
Well, apparently it has just been made illegal.
It's not. It's a non-crime hate incident, which is a way of getting around the fact that it's not actually illegal, but the police are now able to punish people and restrict their rights, etc., over this thing, right? But I guess the core of your argument isn't about that. The core of your argument is, just like me, the people who want to restrict people's speech around memes are doing it because they think this is the type of speech that is harmful and therefore should not be included.
Right, exactly.
Right. There's a difference between inciting people to commit violence and to commit criminal activity, and mocking something, making fun of something, inciting people to laugh. It's not, as far as I'm aware, a crime or dangerous to people to laugh.
But do you think this difference is objective? Surely this is a subjective difference, in which case how do you judge it? Who decides when it is or isn't in this category?
Which is one of the reasons our laws are always written with a reasonable person standard in mind, right? Because you're right, everything is to some extent subject to our individual interpretation, which is why we say, well, a reasonable person would in this set of circumstances feel this way or that way. So yeah, all I'm trying to say is I think of myself as a reasonable person, and I'm trying to articulate the position that reasonable people ought to articulate on this issue. That's all.
Well, I think you're an entirely reasonable person, actually, Konstantin. And fuck
well
the
done.
haters, mate. And congratulations on the success of the book. I know it's been selling well, and you've been doing a lot of media, and you're going from strength to strength. I couldn't be happier to see it happen, mate. I'm really happy for you, and thank you so much for coming on the show, dude. It's been an
really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Great questions as well.
Nice.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please give us 5 stars and consider becoming a subscriber, and maybe even supporting us on Patreon. It really, really, really helps me continue making this show. If you haven't enjoyed it, then you can fuck off. Many, many thanks to Nils Hennis Steer for the amazing music, and to Dave Fox for the cool artwork. Please keep coming back every week for more Bliss of the Abyss.
Message 1.